Hello, church family. As you may recall, on January 8th, I preached the 2023 vision message for our church, a message I entitled, Jesus Leads Us. In that message, we considered how the Bible presents Jesus as the Good Shepherd, and we as his followers are sheep in his pasture. We considered many of the things that Jesus, as our shepherd, does for his sheep. He leads us and he feeds us. He provides for us and he protects us. But among those activities the Good Shepherd does on behalf of the sheep is the reality he describes in our relationship with him. The sheep hear his voice and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. What a fantastic reality. Jesus calls us by name and we hear his voice. At the conclusion of that message, I laid out 3 action steps we believe the Lord is leading us to take in order that we can be those kind of sheep. Well, the first action step was calling the church to a 40-day fast in order that we might be better equipped and attuned to hear the voice of the shepherd. And so it is with great anticipation I'm calling us to this 40-day fast, that God will do far beyond what we think or imagine, both on an individual basis in our lives and on a corporate basis as we as a family of faith observe a 40-day fast together. Now, our church-wide fast is set to begin on next Thursday, February 23rd, and conclude on Good Friday, April 7th. We will break our fast together by coming together as one to worship Jesus at a Good Friday communion service. Now, the purpose of this video is to give you some information and instruction about fasting. You see, because fasting is a tool. It's a spiritual discipline that God uses to do something in our lives and in the church of eternal significance. There is a unique dynamic that occurs when we fast together as a church. And I'm anticipating that we will see captives to sin liberated, that we'll see strongholds broken, that we will see relationships restored, and that we will see power unleashed in our lives in a whole new way. God does these things biblically and historically through the discipline of prayer and fasting. On one occasion, I read this description of fasting, that fasting is, quote, a hunger strike against hell. Fasting causes us to seek and to see vertical solutions to horizontal problems. Fasting will fast track our prayer life. Fasting will break the yoke of bondage. Fasting will release God's power and bring about supernatural results. Fasting will bring divine wisdom to life's perplexing problems. And fasting will humble our hearts and recalibrate our lives that we might walk in a new awareness of God's purpose, being clearly attuned to the voice of the shepherd as he calls out his sheep by name. Well, let me give you a basic definition of a fast. A fast is a period of time during which a person abstains from something central to daily life for spiritual purposes. Let me repeat that. A fast is a period of time during which a person abstains from something central to daily life for spiritual purposes. Now, normally, a fast is abstaining from food, but there are other things you could abstain from for spiritual purposes, and I'll give you some suggestions in just a moment. But normally, when we talk about fasting, we're talking about primarily abstinence from food. And I know invariably some will say, well, I've got this medical condition or I've got this nutritional deficiency, and so I can't fast. I can't go without food. And I certainly don't want to minimize very real health concerns, but I feel quite confident in saying that everybody's got some kinds of food you can go without. We've all got some kind of indulgence we could deny ourselves for the express purpose of hearing the voice of our shepherd. Now, why should we bother fasting? I want us to consider some reasons why fasting can be something incredibly meaningful in our lives. First of all, fasting facilitates a deeper sense of intimacy with God. Drawing close to our Redeemer is of the utmost importance. Do you ever feel like you're being pulled in a million different directions? Well, the best answer for that sensation is to invite the Lord into every area and aspect of our lives, asking Him to prioritize those things according to His purposes. When we forego food for a season of time, it can remind us to set our eyes on what really matters. In fact, Jesus put it this way in John 6:27. He said, "Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you." So fasting facilitates a deeper sense of intimacy with God. Secondly, fasting reveals our weaknesses. And when we recognize those weaknesses, we're moved, even forced, to rely on God. When we fast, we will likely feel physically weaker and therefore more vulnerable. We may have a strong craving that we must resist. Everything might become a little more challenging than normal. Therefore, fasting forces us to rely on God in a renewed way. We're driven into His arms in prayer and dependence. Thirdly, fasting is a way of asking God to move powerfully in our lives, in our church, and in the world. People in the Bible frequently fasted to seek something from God. In the Old Testament, the people of Israel often fasted as they repented and cried out for God's forgiveness. In the New Testament, in the book of Acts, we see church leaders calling a whole congregation to a fast as they prepared to commission missionaries to go out into the world to take the gospel to those who need to hear it. Now, in these instances, God's people fasted in the hope that He would reveal Himself in one way or another. Now, I want to present to you 3 different kinds of fasts you could undertake during this 40-day season leading up to Easter weekend. You could choose one of these or a combination of these. The first would be a fast of no food. Now, this no food fast is by far the most common fast in the Bible. Now, by God's grace, this is the kind of fast I believe God is calling me to undertake for 40 days. By no food, it means just that, no food. And the way I'm personally going to undertake this no food fast is by going on an all liquid diet. I'll drink juices and some supplemental shakes, but no solid food whatsoever for 40 days. Pray for me. Now, for some of you, perhaps you would modify this no food fast to fasting 1 meal a day for 40 days. Then, of course, utilize that time of not eating to seek the Lord. Let the craving of hunger drive you to a craving for God. So that's the first kind of fast, the no food fast. And again, this is by far the most common fast in the Bible. A second fast to consider is what I would call the Daniel fast. In the book of Daniel, the prophet fasts in a couple of different places by avoiding particular foods and beverages. In the very first chapter of Daniel, he chose not to eat the delicacies which were afforded to him by virtue of the fact of his position in the king's palace. In chapter 10, he decides to fast anything that was particularly appetizing. In fact, notice how Daniel 10:3 puts it. He says, "I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks." Now here's the deal. The people of Daniel's day didn't have near the number of food and beverage options we enjoy today. Therefore, his decision to forego meat and wine meant that he committed himself to a very simple, plain, bland, even boring diet. So maybe for 40 days you cut out meat, or you cut out sodas, or you cut out sugar, or some other delicacy in which you regularly indulge. Now, the third kind of fast I would suggest, which can also be very helpful in your spiritual life, is to fast from things other than food. Now, I do want to be clear. Fasting for 40 days from, let's say, Facebook, that does not create the same physical effect and craving that fasting food does. But that being said, remember, the purpose of fasting is to help us experience deeper intimacy with our Good Shepherd and to attune ourselves to hearing His call to His sheep. So for instance, if in your commute to and from work or running around errands in your vehicle, if your immediate practice when driving is to turn on the stereo to listen to music or podcast, how about this? Try driving around for 40 days in complete silence and commune with the Lord. Maybe you spend a lot of time binge watching Netflix or watching hours and hours of sports. And of course, there's always social media. I personally plan on deleting Facebook and Instagram from my phone during this fast as well. These things are tremendous time occupiers, and those large swaths of time can be more effectively used for pursuing Christ. Now, connected to this fast, we are also asking you to get one of the devotionals by John Piper, 50 Reasons That Jesus Came to Die. These are only $3 and they're located on the front pew. If you don't have $3, take one anyway. We want everyone to be reading this devotional together as we head towards Good Friday. Now, before I conclude, I do want to give you a word of warning. I started off this video by talking about how I believed God will use this season of fasting together in a powerful way that we'll see captives to sin liberated. We'll see spiritual strongholds broken, and we'll see God's power unleashed in our lives in a whole new way. I told you that fasting is a hunger strike against hell. Well, here's the word of warning. Satan will not give up territory he's gained in your life without a fight. Fasting is spiritual warfare 101. But remember, we have a good shepherd. And the good shepherd knows his sheep. The good shepherd protects his sheep. And the good shepherd keeps his sheep. In fact, Jesus said in that passage about the good shepherd, he said the enemy, that's Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But he, the good shepherd, has come to give us life and life abundantly. I'm looking forward with great anticipation to all that God will do in us and through us as we seek him in desperation.